The first day at Crestwood Academy was supposed to be exciting, but the stares started before Simone even stepped out of her car. The late September sun cast a golden glow over the manicured lawns of Crestwood Academy in Greenwich, Connecticut. Simone Brooks eased her Navy SUV into the crowded parking lot, her fingers lightly tapping the steering wheel as soft jazz played on the radio. This was supposed to be a new beginning for her family. They had left Atlanta behind for her husband Nathan's new role as CEO of a biotech firm. Crestwood promised opportunity, at least on paper. But as Simone looked around at the polished luxury SUVs and clusters of sharply dressed parents, she already felt the unspoken tension. Simone, a 36-year-old black woman, carried herself with quiet grace. Her deep brown skin glowed in the afternoon sun, framed by shoulder-length curls that gently bounced as she moved. In a simple white blouse and jeans, she stood out among the designer blazers and silk scarves surrounding her. She wasn't unfamiliar with these spaces' boardrooms, charity galas, conferences, but this was different. This was about her daughter's world now. As Simone stepped out, she immediately noticed the shift in energy. Conversations dipped just enough for her to catch faint whispers. A blonde woman near a white Range Rover murmured to her friend, "New nanny, maybe." The words weren't meant for Simone to respond, only to remind her that in their eyes her skin color marked her as an outsider. She adjusted her purse and walked toward the shaded pickup zone, keeping her composure. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated because she was a black woman. But today, the sting felt sharper. She wanted Crestwood to be a place where her daughter Maya could thrive without carrying the same burdens. The school doors swung open, and a rush of children spilled out. Simone's heart lifted as she searched for Maya's familiar face. Then she heard the sweetest sound. Mama Maya's voice rang like a bell. The 6-year-old girl with her warm brown skin and bouncy curls sprinted toward her mother, pink backpack swaying. Simone knelt, opening her arms wide. "There's my girl," she whispered, pulling Maya close. For a brief moment, the outside noise faded. This was what mattered. "You're here," Maya grinned, her eyes sparkling. "Always, baby." Simone smiled, brushing a curl from Maya's forehead. But as she stood hand in hand with her daughter, the weight of those watching eyes returned heavier than before. Near the front of the line stood Paige Whitmore, tall and poised in a tailored navy blazer, the very picture of old Greenwich wealth. Paige's gaze swept over Simone, pausing at her jeans, her expression unreadable but cool. Simone offered a polite nod. Paige's tight smile barely shifted. A few steps away, another parent approached a man in a golf shirt, embroidered with the Greenwich Yacht Club logo. "First time here?" he asked, his smile, thin eyes quickly assessing her. "Yes," Simone replied evenly. "My daughter started this week." The man's nod was dismissive. "Well, Crestwood's selective. Not everyone gets in." The words hung heavily coded but clear. Simone's fingers tightened around Maya's small hand, but her voice remained calm. "We're grateful to be here." The man offered no reply and turned back toward his group, signaling the conversation was over. As more parents greeted each other like old friends, Simone stood alone. She wasn't invited into any conversations. No warm welcomes, no introductions. She was being silently judged, not because of who she was, but because she was a black mother, daring to exist in a space they believed wasn't meant for her. Maya hummed softly beside her, oblivious for now. But Simone felt the undercurrent. Had she promised too much? Could she protect Maya from these quiet walls built by centuries of exclusion? As a cool breeze rustled the leaves, Simone knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was only the beginning. The rules at Crestwood weren't written down, but everyone knew them. The next afternoon, Simone Brooks returned to the familiar parking lot of Crestwood Academy. The autumn breeze carried a crispness that hinted at the coming chill, stirring the red and gold leaves that danced along the perfectly trimmed sidewalks. Though the sun shone gently, there was a different kind of chill in the air, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Simone, a black woman, standing tall in her simple gray sweater and dark jeans, stepped out of her SUV, her curls gently swaying as she adjusted the strap of her tote bag. The invisible eyes found her instantly, just as they had yesterday. Whispers floated again, almost rhythmically now, as if her presence had become today's entertainment. A cluster of mothers stood nearby, their designer scarves fluttering slightly. Among them was Paige Whitmore. Today, Paige wore a fitted cream blazer, her blonde bob perfectly styled, her posture effortlessly commanding. She broke from her group with an easy confidence, strolling directly toward Simone, her sharp heels clicking softly on the stone path. With a smile too polished to be warm, Paige extended a hand. "I didn't see you at the parent brunch last weekend," she said, her voice smooth. "We always encourage new families to attend. It's such a wonderful way to meet the community." Simone returned the handshake with quiet grace, noting the subtle emphasis on community. "We had just moved in, still getting settled," Simone replied. "My husband started his new position recently." "Oh," Paige's eyebrow lifted, inviting further disclosure. "And what field is he in, biotech?" Simone answered simply, offering nothing more. Paige's eyes flickered briefly toward Simone's jeans before her expression settled into one of faint amusement. "How lovely," she said. "Crestwood values strong families. Not everyone appreciates what this school represents." The words hung between them like a thin sheet of ice. The unspoken message was clear: this wasn't only about academics, it was about belonging to a particular world. And to many here, a black woman like Simone didn't fit easily into that mold. Before Simone could reply, another figure joined them. Bryce Caldwell, tall, broad-shouldered, his Yale golf jacket unzipped just enough to reveal the club crest on his polo shirt. His easy smirk mirrored the same confidence that Paige carried. "I don't think we've met," Bryce said, offering Simone a handshake, though his tone was more performance than genuine welcome. "I'm Bryce Caldwell. My boys have been at Crestwood for years. Simone Brooks." She introduced herself, her smile unwavering. Bryce gave a small nod, glancing over her attire briefly. "Biotech, huh?" he echoed Paige's earlier question. "We get some new families through the hedge fund crowd, but not so much from that sector." His chuckle was soft but intentional. "Well, Crestwood's a special place. Not everyone finds it's quite the right fit." Simone met his gaze, her own eyes calm but steady. She had heard this type of coded language before, genteel exclusion dressed as polite conversation. "We're looking forward to being part of the community," she said, offering him nothing to latch onto. Maya's voice suddenly rang out, breaking the tension. "Mama." The little girl darted through the crowd, backpack bouncing, curls flying. Simone knelt to embrace her daughter, grateful for the interruption. As she rose with Maya's hand clasped in hers, Simone caught sight of the small exchanges between Paige and Bryce. Brief glances, knowing smiles, as if silently congratulating one another for their subtle interrogation. But then another figure appeared, Ms. Loretta Winslow, the school's administrator. Her navy skirt suit was impeccable, clipboard clutched firmly in one hand as she approached. Her expression, like her tone, was professional but clipped. "Mrs. Brooks," Ms. Winslow said. Voice brisk. "May I see your identification, please?" Simone blinked, momentarily confused. Around her, other parents were chatting easily, gathering their children without interference. "I've already submitted all required forms when we enrolled," Maya Simone said gently but firmly. "Yes, of course," Ms. Winslow replied, glancing quickly at Paige and Bryce before continuing. "It's simply a matter of verification. For the safety of the children, we sometimes perform random checks." Simone's fingers tightened slightly on Maya's hand. She reached into her purse, producing her driver's license, and handing it over without breaking eye contact. "I am Maya Brooks's mother." Ms. Winslow studied the ID longer than necessary. Her lips pursed in concentration. When she finally handed it back, her voice remained controlled. "Thank you. Going forward, please ensure you are listed properly on the approved pickup roster. We can't release students otherwise." Simone inhaled slowly. "As I mentioned, my husband and I completed all the necessary paperwork. We've submitted everything requested." Bryce chimed in with a practiced chuckle, clearly enjoying the moment. "Oh, don't take it personally. They're just being thorough. After all, we all want what's best for the children's safety." "Of course," Paige added with a saccharine smile. "Crestwood has very high standards. We all make sacrifices to maintain them." Their smiles were masks, but the blade beneath was sharp. The implication wasn't just about school procedures. It was about who belonged and who didn't. Maya, sensing the shift, looked up at her mother, confusion clouding her bright eyes. "Mama, why are they being mean?" Simone bent slightly, squeezing Maya's hand. "They're just confused, baby," she whispered softly. "Stay close." Her voice was calm, but inside her chest burned. This wasn't new, but here in front of her daughter, it cut deeper than it had in boardrooms or hotel lobbies. This was personal. This was about Maya's place in the world. As the breeze stirred again, carrying with it the faint laughter of the other parents, Simone stood straighter. Whatever these people thought, she would not be diminished. And she knew in her gut that this was far from over. A mother's patience has limits, but Crestwood was determined to test Simone's. By the end of the week, the afternoon skies over Greenwich had turned grayer heavy, with low clouds that threatened rain. The parking lot of Crestwood Academy buzzed with its usual hum of luxury vehicles and polished parents chatting in curated clusters. Simone Brooks pulled into her familiar space, her knuckles tightening briefly around the steering wheel before she shut off the engine. Every day here chipped away at her resolve just a little more. The weight of being a black woman standing among a sea of white privilege felt heavier with each visit. Simone stepped out dressed neatly in a navy sweater and slacks, Maya's favorite pink scarf peeking out from her tote bag. She walked toward the pickup zone, aware of how quickly the glances found her again. The whispers that followed had become sharper, no longer just curiosity, but sharpened judgment. As she waited, Maya's teacher guided the children outside. Maya spotted her mother immediately, her curls bouncing as she ran forward. "Mama," she sang out, her small hands clutching a drawing she had made in class. Simone smiled warmly, kneeling to embrace her daughter. "There's my artist," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Maya's forehead. But as she stood up, Maya's hand nestled safely in hers. The murmurs resumed. From the far side of the pickup area, Paige Whitmore approached with her usual confidence, her expression as polished as ever. Today, her diamond earrings caught the dull light, sparkling like tiny weapons. Bryce Caldwell followed closely behind his arms, crossed his smug grin already in place. Paige's voice was light, but the words carried sharp intent. "Simone, I was just speaking to the board about how Crestwood has been making admirable efforts to broaden its community." Simone recognized the code instantly. "It's important that every child has access to a strong education," she replied evenly. Bryce let out a soft chuckle, his tone dripping with condescension. "Of course. But it's also important that families understand the standards here. Some schools have, different expectations." Simone's eyes narrowed slightly. "Crestwood's standards, as I understand, apply equally to every student." "That's the ideal," Paige replied smoothly. "But not every family fully appreciates the responsibilities that come with being part of a place like Crestwood." Fundraisers, parent committees, the community's shared values. She trailed off, allowing the implication to linger. As if rehearsed, Bryce added, public schools downtown might be a more comfortable fit for some families. His gaze swept over Simone's dark complexion and simple attire, leaving no doubt about whom he meant. Maya, sensing the tension, pressed closer to her mother. Simone could feel her daughter's small fingers tighten around her own. "Mama, can we go home?" Maya whispered, her voice small. Simone bent slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Soon, baby. Just stay close." Before Simone could respond to the veiled insults, Ms. Loretta Winslow approached her clipboard, clutched like a badge of authority. Her heels clicked on the pavement as she stopped in front of Simone, her expression coldly professional. "Mrs. Brooks." Ms. Winslow began, her voice clipped. "I need to verify your authorization for today's pickup." Simone blinked, keeping her voice steady. "As I explained yesterday, I am Maya's mother. My husband and I submitted all the paperwork on enrollment." "This is simply protocol," Ms. Winslow said, her tone stiffening. "We have to be extra cautious." Simone's chest tightened. Around them, other parents collected their children without interference, chatting casually, exchanging hugs and goodbyes, none being stopped, none being questioned. The only difference was her dark skin, standing in contrast to the sea of pale faces. "I've provided my identification before," Simone said, her voice firm but controlled. "Why am I being singled out again?" Bryce stepped forward slightly, his smirk deepening. "Don't take offense, Mrs. Brooks. Security measures apply to everyone." Simone turned toward him, meeting his gaze directly. "Do they? I don't see anyone else being asked for ID." A few nearby parents glanced over but quickly averted their eyes, pretending not to hear. The silent complicity stung more than any words spoken aloud. Paige crossed her arms, her smile thinning. "We're just trying to maintain order. Surely you understand how important it is to follow the rules." Maya clung to her mother's arm, now her eyes wide. "Mama, why are they being mean?" she whispered again. Simone's heart twisted. She knelt, looking into her daughter's innocent face. "They're confused, baby," she whispered. "But you don't need to worry." Ms. Winslow's patience thinned. "Mrs. Brooks, if you cannot comply, I'll have no choice but to contact security to resolve this matter." Simone rose slowly, standing tall. Her voice remained steady, though a storm brewed inside. "I have complied. I am Maya's mother. I submitted every document your office requested. You are creating an issue where none exists." The growing circle of parents began murmuring louder now. Some wore expressions of discomfort. Others seemed to relish the unfolding scene. The tension was thick, hanging like heavy fog over the pristine campus. Bryce leaned slightly toward Paige, speaking just loudly enough for others to hear. "Some people just don't understand how things work here." Simone exhaled sharply, restraining the anger bubbling beneath her ribs. She glanced around at the sea of faces watching, but refusing to intervene. She had been through this before, in airports and boutiques, in neighborhoods that whispered about property values. But never had it felt so cutting as here, with Maya clinging silently to her side. Paige delivered the final sting with surgical precision. "If you find Crestwood's policies too difficult, perhaps another school would better suit your needs." Her pause before the word needs sliced through the air like a blade. Ms. Winslow lifted her clipboard higher, her voice sharper now. "This is the final warning, Mrs. Brooks. Either step aside while I verify your status, or you will be escorted off school property." Simone's pulse pounded, her hands trembling only slightly as she pulled Maya closer. She opened her mouth to respond when the low hum of a vehicle pierced the heavy silence. Heads turned as a sleek silver Tesla glided into the parking lot, its polished surface gleaming beneath the overcast sky. The car door opened, and Nathan Brooks stepped out, his calm but purposeful stride cutting through the growing circle like a knife. His tall frame, sharp navy suit, and warm but focused gaze immediately shifted the dynamic. The crowd instinctively parted, unsure of what was about to unfold. The storm was far from over, but Simone was no longer alone. Sometimes all it takes is one voice and one person who refuses to stay silent. The air at Crestwood Academy crackled with tension as Nathan Brooks stepped from the sleek Tesla, his presence shifting the atmosphere instantly. The hushed murmurs, once bold, now wavered, as parents turned to observe the tall, fair-skinned man in his tailored navy suit. His blue eyes swept the scene instantly, registering the rigid stance of his wife, the tight grip Maya had on Simone's hand, and the stiff, authoritarian posture of Ms. Loretta Winslow, with her clipboard clutched like a gavel. Nathan crossed the remaining distance with calm authority. His voice, steady but edged with steel, broke the heavy silence. "Good afternoon," he said, eyes locking onto Ms. Winslow. "Is there a problem here?" Simone didn't falter. "Not exactly," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "They don't seem to think I belong here." Nathan's gaze hardened. He turned to Ms. Winslow, who immediately straightened, struggling to maintain her earlier confidence. "Sir, this is simply a matter of school protocol verification procedures." "Protocols." Nathan repeated, his voice quiet but cutting. "Protocols that require my wife to present ID repeatedly while other parents collect their children without question. Protocols that threaten her with security for doing what every other parent here is allowed to do freely." Ms. Winslow faltered, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. Bryce Caldwell shifted uncomfortably, folding his arms tighter across his chest. Paige Whitmore stood rigid, her smile now strained. Paige stepped forward, her voice smooth as if to regain control. "Mr. Brooks, it's really just a misunderstanding. We're all protective of the children here. The staff simply—" Nathan cut her off, his tone firm. "Protective." His voice rose just slightly enough to carry to the gathering crowd. "Protective would mean treating every parent with the same respect, not singling out my wife because of the color of her skin." A murmur rippled through the parents. Some looked down. Others shifted nervously. No one spoke. Nathan continued, his words slow and deliberate. "For anyone who may be unclear, my wife Simone Brooks is Maya's mother. She is an environmental consultant who's helped cities and corporations save millions through her work. She sits on the board of the Seattle Youth Arts Fund. And like every other parent here, she deserves to pick up her daughter without being interrogated." For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling the leaves overhead. Simone stood taller beside him, her grip on Maya firm but comforting. Bryce tried to interject with a weak chuckle, desperate to downplay the confrontation. "Now let's not make this about race. Crestwood has always been welcoming." Simone's voice rose, then strong and clear, to whom she scanned the faces around her, many of whom now avoided her gaze. "Not to me. Not when I'm treated like an outsider for no reason other than being a black woman standing on this lawn." The crowd tensed further. Maya looked up at her mother, sensing the shift, her wide brown eyes filled with both confusion and admiration. At the edge of the gathering, a young teacher's aide took a tentative step forward. Rachel Morales, who had quietly observed all week, finally found her voice. Her cheeks flushed, but her words were clear. "Mrs. Brooks is right," Rachel said, her voice trembling, but gaining strength with every word. "I saw what happened." She explained who she was from the beginning, But Ms. Winslow kept pressing even after seeing her ID. No one else is treated like that here. I've seen this before. It's not fair. Rachel's admission landed like a crack splitting through the icy facade Crestwood had carefully maintained. Eyes widened. More parents shifted uneasily, realizing they could no longer pretend this was harmless procedure. Nathan nodded at Rachel, his voice softening. Thank you for speaking the truth. Ms. Winslow's face had drained of color. Her clipboard lowered slightly, her confidence crumbling. Sir, I was only following school safety guidelines. No, Nathan corrected, his voice low, but devastating. You were following assumptions. The silence that followed was punctuated by a new voice, calm but powerful. Enough! All eyes turned as Mrs. Charlotte Pendleton stepped forward from the crowd, her silver hair pinned in an elegant twist, her understated navy dress giving her an air of dignified authority. She was well known, a name that carried weight at Crestwood. Her family's donations helped build the school's library wing, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. She began addressing them with warmth and steady grace. Please accept my deepest apologies for what you've endured. It shames me that Crestwood has come to this. Gasps rippled softly through the crowd. Paige's face paled. Bryce stood frozen. Even Ms. Winslow wavered. Mrs. Pendleton's gaze shifted to Ms. Winslow. I've watched this school lose its way trading character for appearances, and today proves it. You've turned a place of learning into a gated club, and I refuse to support it any longer. Her husband, standing just behind her, spoke quietly but firmly. We'll be withdrawing our grandchildren effective immediately. The statement hit like thunder. The crowd, once silently complicit, now stood fragmented, some parents murmuring in agreement, others exchanging nervous glances. Rachel Morales, emboldened, stepped forward once more. And I can't be part of this any longer either. This isn't why I became an educator. She unpinned her staff badge and handed it to Ms. Winslow, who stood speechless, her fingers trembling as she accepted it. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then Nathan gently placed a hand on Simone's back. Let's go, he said quietly. Simone nodded, glancing down at Maya, who looked up at both of them with wide, trusting eyes. They walked together side by side, leaving behind the shattered pretense of Crestwood's polished image. The battle was far from over, but now the reckoning had begun. One crack in the foundation, and the whole house starts to shift. The days following the confrontation at Crestwood Academy unfolded like ripples across a once still pond. Greenwich, so carefully polished in its routines and circles of influence, buzzed quietly with whispered conversations and cautious speculation. At coffee shops, charity luncheons, and PTA gatherings, the story spread not from official sources, but from lips that had seen too much and stayed silent too long. Simone Brooks sat by the large window of a corner cafe downtown, nursing a cup of black coffee as raindrops pattered softly against the glass. Autumn had fully arrived, painting the streets in deep reds and burnt oranges. She stared at her phone, scrolling through headlines that seemed almost surreal. Private school faces, allegations of discriminatory practices blared across the top of the local paper's website. The article was careful not to name names directly, but anyone who lived in Greenwich knew exactly which school it was. Across from her, Nathan leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming thoughtfully against his mug. It's not just Crestwood anymore, he said softly. Parents from other private schools are starting to talk. This was long overdue. Simone sighed, her gaze dropping momentarily. I never wanted to be the center of a story like this, she admitted. But if this forces people to see what's been hiding in plain sight, then maybe it's worth it. Nathan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. You stood up for Maya. That's always worth it. As the scandal simmered, the reactions varied. Some parents defensively clung to the school's image, insisting the accusations were exaggerated. Others, particularly those who had long whispered their discomfort behind closed doors, finally stepped forward anonymously, at first sharing their own quiet experiences of exclusion and subtle cruelty. For Rachel Morales, the young teacher's aide who had spoken up, the fallout had been immediate. She had formally resigned the morning after returning her badge to Ms. Winslow. But within days, Rachel reached out to Simone privately, her voice over the phone both nervous and determined. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," Rachel had said. "But I want to do more. If you're building something that actually helps kids, I want to be part of it." That conversation had sparked the early sketches of what Simone and Nathan had been quietly considering, even before moving to Greenwich, a community program that would make space for every child, regardless of race, income, or zip code. Meanwhile, the board at Crestwood scrambled to contain the public relations disaster. Ms. Winslow, once so composed, was now barely visible on campus. Rumors swirled of closed-door meetings and lawyers reviewing policy handbooks. Her resignation, when it finally came, was announced in a brief, carefully worded statement about pursuing other opportunities. The real blow came when the New York Times picked up the story, expanding it into a full feature. The article laid bare not only Simone's experience, but also echoed similar stories from families of color across elite prep schools throughout the Northeast. It wasn't just Crestwood anymore. It was a mirror held up to an entire system. Nathan read the piece aloud that evening in their living room, his voice steady, though Simone could hear the undercurrent of pride and anger woven together. When he finished, Maya curled up beside Simone on the couch, looked up at her mother. "Mommy," she asked softly, "why do people think we don't belong?" Simone ran her fingers gently through Maya's curls, her heart aching at the innocence behind the question. "Because some people forget that kindness doesn't have a color, baby," she whispered. "But we remind them. Every day." Nathan wrapped his arm around both of them, his voice quiet but sure. "You remind them, Simone." Elsewhere in Greenwich, conversations that had once been unthinkable now filled charity galas and dinner parties. Even Mrs. Charlotte Pendleton, who had so publicly withdrawn her grandchildren from Crestwood, became an unlikely catalyst for deeper discussions within the town's older circles. Simone received an unexpected note from her one afternoon, handwritten on thick stationery. "Dear Mrs. Brooks, I meant every word I said that day. If there's any way I can support the work you're building, consider me at your service." The world was shifting slowly, unevenly, but shifting nonetheless. For years, people like Simone had walked on carefully balanced tightropes in places like Greenwich, asked to perform respectability, while quietly enduring microaggressions that accumulated like invisible scars. But this time, the silence had been broken. Nathan closed his laptop and looked across the living room toward Simone. "You realize this has already grown far beyond what we imagined." She nodded. "We've started something bigger than just us." And they had. The first plans for the Brooks Community Hub were now in motion, not just an after-school program, but a center designed to provide mentorship, tutoring, and enrichment to children who too often fell outside the gilded gates of schools like Crestwood. Rachel had taken the lead in developing an inclusive curriculum. Private donors inspired by Mrs. Pendleton's public stance had quietly begun to contribute. The Brooks family knew that change at Crestwood might be slow, symbolic even. But the ripples their stand created had reached far beyond that pristine lawn. They were no longer alone. And the next generation, Maya's generation, would grow up with new spaces carved out by courage. As autumn deepened into early winter, and the first hints of snow teased the horizon, Nathan and Simone stood together looking forward at the work ahead. The battle was far from over, But finally, for the first time in a long time, they were no longer simply reacting. They were building. Not every victory is loud. Some arrive in quiet rooms filled with laughter and hope. 3 months had passed since the storm at Crestwood Academy. The winter snow had melted into early spring, and with it came the soft rebirth of Greenwich, under pale blue skies and budding cherry blossoms. For Simone Brooks, life had shifted into something steadier, not easier, but steadier. The chaos had faded into purposeful work. Today was Maya's 7th birthday, and the small community center that now bore the Brooks name hummed with life. The Brooks Community Hub sat just a few miles from Crestwood, but felt like a different world entirely. Inside, children from all corners of Greenwich, children of color, working-class families, immigrant parents gathered for after-school programs, tutoring, and arts workshops that welcomed every kind of story. Simone stood near a long table covered in cupcakes and paper crowns, her simple lilac dress flowing softly as she watched Maya giggle with her friends. The girl's warm brown skin glowed under the afternoon sun, pouring through tall windows, her curls bouncing as she darted between balloons and crafts. Her world, at least today, felt safe and full. Nathan approached with 2 paper plates in hand, passing one to Simone. "The unicorn cupcakes are officially a hit," he said, smiling. "They worked hard on those." Simone chuckled softly, watching Maya carefully frost one of her own. It's good to see her smile like this. She's not the only one smiling. Nathan glanced across the room where Rachel Morales stood, now officially program director of the Hub. Rachel had blossomed since leaving Crestwood, her voice stronger, her confidence steady as she guided a group of volunteers arranging books for the small reading nook. "She's thriving here," Simone whispered. "She found where she's meant to be." Rachel caught Simone's glance across the room and offered a warm nod, one of quiet partnership. The 2 women had grown close bound, not by pity or obligation, but by shared courage. The guests that afternoon were a blend that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. Parents from diverse neighborhoods mingled with those who once sat in Crestwood's polished auditoriums. Even Mrs. Charlotte Pendleton, dressed in her elegant navy coat, stood near the coffee table chatting with local educators. Her quiet donations had helped furnish much of the Hub, though she never sought recognition. "I see you managed to convince half of Greenwich to believe in second chances," Nathan teased gently. "Not just me." Simone smiled, slipping her hand into his. People were waiting for someone to say it was possible. Their eyes turned back to Maya, who now stood proudly at the head of the table, her paper birthday crown slightly askew as her friends gathered around. "Time for cake," Rachel called out, leading the small crowd into a cheerful chorus of happy birthday. Maya's grin widened as she closed her eyes to make a wish before blowing out the candles. As the children cheered, Simone felt a familiar tightness in her throat. Not sadness, but gratitude. They had walked through fire, and somehow they stood here now, not untouched, but stronger. Later that evening, when the guests had left and volunteers began clearing the space, Simone and Nathan stood quietly near the window, watching Maya help fold leftover paper decorations. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting warm halos over the quiet neighborhood. Nathan's voice was soft. "You did this." "We did this," Simone corrected gently, leaning into him. "And Rachel, and Charlotte. And every person who decided enough was enough." Nathan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "It all started with one afternoon at pickup." Simone exhaled slowly. "That day felt like the world was closing in on us. And now, look." Nathan glanced at Maya, her small hands working carefully with the other kids. "She's learning something most people take a lifetime to understand." Simone followed his gaze. "That she belongs." The weight of those simple words settled between them, carrying all the layers of what had been lost, fought for, and won. Not every battle was won in courtrooms or on front pages. Some were won right here in quiet rooms filled with children laughing freely. As they gathered their coats, Rachel approached one last time, her eyes shining. "Thank you, both of you," she said, "for giving me a chance to be part of this." Simone smiled, placing a hand gently on Rachel's arm. "You didn't need a chance, Rachel. You only needed a space where your voice mattered." The three women exchanged a quiet moment of understanding before stepping into the cool spring air. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and open like the future they were now writing, not just for themselves, but for Maya and every child who would follow. And as the door to the Brooks Community Hub closed softly behind them, it wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning. There's a certain kind of quiet that settles after the hardest storms pass. Not the silence of defeat, but of something more profound, the quiet that comes when courage has done its work. On a gentle spring evening in Greenwich, under a sky freckled with stars, Simone Brooks stood hand in hand with her family, knowing they had crossed an invisible line that many before them had been forced to face. But this time they hadn't just endured. They had changed something. Their journey had begun not with shouts or grand speeches, but with a simple afternoon pickup, one mother, one daughter, and a line of unspoken expectations that revealed themselves like cracks in fine porcelain. The stares, the subtle questions, the veiled dismissals, each moment had carried the heavy weight of centuries-old prejudice wrapped in polite smiles and carefully chosen words. But Simone, a black woman standing firmly on the strength of her dignity, refused to shrink. In choosing to stand tall, she reminded the world of a truth that often gets lost behind glossy doors and polished hallways, that belonging isn't dictated by skin color, income, or designer labels. It's anchored in the simple yet powerful act of claiming one's rightful place, not with arrogance but with quiet certainty. Nathan's steadfast support, Rachel's brave voice, and even the unexpected allyship of Mrs. Pendleton wove together a tapestry of courage that broke through generations of unchallenged exclusion. Prejudice rarely announces itself loudly anymore. Often it whispers, hides behind rules and procedures, presenting itself as concern or tradition. But even in its most polite form, injustice remains injustice. And sometimes all it takes is one voice to say, "This isn't right," for the walls to begin to tremble. The story of Simone and Maya is a gentle but unwavering reminder that breaking the chains of judgment doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it only asks that we refuse to quietly accept what is wrong. It is through talent, patience, and the moral clarity to act in moments of quiet injustice that real change begins to root itself. Like a steady light left burning in the window through a long winter night, the courage to stand up even when no one expects you to can guide not only yourself, but others who are still searching for the way forward. So perhaps as we sit with this story, we might pause and reflect. Who around us today is quietly carrying a weight unseen? And what might change if we dared in our own small way to see past appearances and stand beside them? If this story has stirred something in you, consider sharing that warmth, for sometimes a single act of grace can spark the kind of change that lasts far beyond what we can see.